HMs, or hidden machines, are one of the most universally hated features in Pokémon games. They were in the games from the start, but were removed entirely by the 7th generation with Sun and Moon. The reaction to this change was overwhelmingly positive, and I definitely agree that this was an overall good change. But when I go back to play some of the older Pokémon games, I can't help but think about the wasted potential of HMs. And honestly, I think that with a few changes to the formula, HMs could have stayed a staple mechanic of the Pokémon series. I think the reason that many fans hate HMs is because of three main factors. First, there are a lot of HMs. Each game that has them has at least 5. This means that if you try to use one Pokemon on your team for just HMs, you would still need to teach at least one HM to another Pokemon. The majority of games with HMs have around 7 to 8 of them, which means that you need at least 2 whole Pokemon to learn only HM moves if you do not want to have your team using HMs. There is also a problem with the fact that there are not many Pokemon that can learn more than one HM. So in most games with them, you have to form your team around them, planning which Pokemon will learn HMs and how many each Pokemon will learn. Second, a lot of HM moves are really bad. While there are good moves that happen to be HMs, like Surf, Waterfall, and Strength, the majority are either really weak or really bad. There's Rock Smash, Cut, and Whirlpool that have a low base power, which makes them less useful in the late game. And then there's Fly, Dive, and Rock Climb, which have high base power, but big drawbacks, such as being multi-turn moves or having a lower accuracy. There's also Flash and Defog, which are ultimately useless in battle. Third, HMs are used way too often. Pokemon limits progression by inserting roadblocks that can only be passed with the use of an HM. But the player cannot use that until they either obtain it or obtain the gym badge so that they can use it. And since HM moves cannot be deleted traditionally, players are forced to teach HMs and keep them on their Pokemon until they can reach the move deleter, but then players are forced to reteach HMs when they're required to later in the game. This is especially bad with each game's victory road often requiring the most use of HMs that players collect throughout the games. With all of these factors combined, players have rightfully formed a negative opinion around HMs. But there are solutions to these problems. For example, Generation 5 made a lot of changes to the traditional Pokémon formula. One of those changes being HMs. There are a total of 6 HMs in Pokémon Black and White, being Cut, Fly, Surf, Strength, Waterfall, and Dive. But throughout the whole game, you are only required to use an HM once, which is on the Cut tree in the Dream Yard. So what are the other HMs used for? Exploration. Pokémon Black and White is a very linear game, so to combat this, there are extra areas the player can explore by using HMs. It can be as simple as a cut tree that provides a shortcut or gives access to an item, or surfing to a new area to explore. A good example is Route 17 and 18, which you can access by using Surf on Route 1. There is so much to find here, including a gift egg, the HM for Waterfall, a bunch of items, useful TMs, and even some Pokemon. Even if this doesn't sound too interesting, there are so many new areas to explore with HMs, including Wellspring Cave, Mistralton Cave, Undella Bay, the Abyssal Ruins, Abundant Shrine, Giant Chasm, and even more sub-areas and routes in several dungeons. Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are a good example of how to have HMs in a game without actually having HMs. When Pokémon started the remake process of the 4th gen games, the issue was how they should approach using HMs in this generation when they didn't exist in Sword and Shield. They decided to keep HMs, but whenever a player collects one, they are able to use the move through an app on the Pokétch. This removes the pain of having to change your team based on which HMs you need to use. And in a game with so many HMs required, this makes a game so much more enjoyable for me to play. And you can still teach your Pokemon the HM moves, but you don't have to worry about keeping them. This is a great solution to keep the spirit of HMs alive without having the pain of having them stuck on your Pokemon. I have thought of other ways HMs could be used in a future Pokemon game. With TMs being reusable since Gen 5, what if HMs were just TMs with overworld effects? We have seen this in previous games with moves like Dig and Teleport, but what if HMs functioned in similar ways? This could be a simple change, just making HMs deletable without the move deleter. But it would make it easier to adjust your team composition, and it would prevent having to use a Pokemon with only HM moves. There could also be alternative HM moves. I heard many complaints on team building with HM since it is pretty much required to have a water type and or a flying type for Surf and Fly. What if instead of just having Surf to get over water, there was an alternative? Maybe there is a ground type move that creates a platform on the water, or a psychic or flying type move that lets the user float over the water. By having different moves that have the same effect, this would allow for more diverse team composition. Honestly, I know that Pokemon will never bring back HMs, nor do I want them to bring back HMs. I am a big fan of the replacements they've given in the newer generation. My favorite is Koraidon and Miraidon in Scarlet and Violet because the story with them is really interesting, and I liked seeing the player character form a bond with the Pokemon. I just really wanted to make this video as a retrospective of one of the most universally hated game mechanics, and honestly, I've formed a new opinion on HMs. They aren't inherently bad ideas, just wasted potential, and with a few changes to the formula, they could have been much better.